All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're stepping out of the trenches and into the high command war rooms. We're going to put ourselves in the shoes of a World War I commander and try to understand the absolute nightmare they faced. A strategic puzzle where every single move, right or wrong, could mean the deaths of thousands.
Just let that sink in for a second. My plan is to bleed France white. This one quote from Germany's top general, Erich von Falkenhayn, tells you everything you need to know about how this war changed. Forget brilliant battlefield maneuvers. This was something else entirely. A cold, brutal new logic that was about to define the whole conflict. This was a war of extermination.
So how on earth did they get to that point? Well, we're going to walk through the 4 huge problems they were up against. We'll start with the clash between their plans and the brutal reality. Then we'll look at the stalemate machine itself. After that, the grim logic of attrition. And finally, the desperate hunt for a breakthrough.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1914, and you have to understand everybody, the French, the Germans, the British, they all thought this was going to be a quick, glorious war. Their entire military education was built on the wars of the 1800s. Sweeping movements, heroic cavalry charges. They all genuinely believed their boys would be home by Christmas. Man, they could not have been more wrong.
And yeah, those grand plans, they just shattered on impact with reality, almost instantly. You take the Germans' famous Schlieffen Plan. It was supposed to be this lightning-fast knockout blow through Belgium to take out France. But what did they get? They got bogged down by fierce Belgian resistance, then slammed into a wall at the Battle of the Marne. And by the end of the year, instead of victory parades in Paris, they got a 350-mile-long gash of trenches scarring the face of Europe.
And if you want a perfect symbol of this whole mess, look no further than this. Seriously, the French army marched off to war in 1914 wearing bright blue coats and these vibrant red trousers. Can you imagine? It looks great on a parade ground, sure, but when you're walking toward machine guns, you're basically a giant walking target. It was a fatal, fatal mistake, a relic from a totally different age of war.
And this is the price of wearing red trousers into a machine gun fight. 250,000 casualties. And that's not for the whole war, that's for both sides in one battle, the Marne, just weeks in. Think about it from the commander's perspective. Everything you've ever learnt, every tactic you've studied, just evaporates in a few hours. And the cost of that lesson is an absolutely staggering number of lives. All right, so the war of movement is dead, utterly failed. And in its place, you get something new, something awful, the stalemate. It wasn't just a pause in the fighting, it was a machine. So let's break down the parts of this stalemate machine and see exactly why no man's land became one of the most terrifying phrases imaginable. So what was the main gear in this machine? What was the biggest killer of the war? It wasn't the rifle, it wasn't the bayonet charge, no, it was artillery. Just look at this, almost 60% of British casualties on the Western Front came from artillery shells. We're talking about industrialized slaughter on a scale no one had ever seen. A constant, mind-breaking rain of explosives that could obliterate you from miles away. As a commander, you're not even fighting what you can see anymore. You're fighting an industrial, invisible force.
And if, by some miracle, you survived the shell fire, you then had to face this thing, the machine gun. The Vickers gun here could spit out 600 rounds a minute. It just owned the battlefield. You could have a couple of guys with one of these things, and they could stop an attack of thousands in its tracks. It made any patch of open ground a killing field. It's the weapon that literally forced armies to dig into the earth just to stay alive.
So, you're a commander. What's your move? How do you possibly break this? Well, for years, the only answer they came up with was this insane, bloody cycle. Step 1. A gigantic artillery barrage that churns the earth for days, supposed to cut the barbed wire and smash the enemy defenses. Step 2. Blow the whistle and send thousands of your men over the top. But what really happens? The enemy just waits it out deep in their bunkers, then comes up with their machine guns as your guys are tangled in the wire. The result? A slaughter. For what? Maybe a few meters of mud? Can you imagine having to give that order over and over, knowing what was going to happen? That was the job.
So after years of this pointless slaughter, it finally dawns on the high command that a clever tactical breakthrough just isn't going to happen. And that's when a new, absolutely chilling idea takes root. The thinking goes like this. If you can't break their line, you just have to break their nation. You have to bleed them. And this is what we call a war of attrition. The whole game changes. It's not about winning battles anymore. It's a war of competing factories, competing economies, and competing populations. The winner will simply be the last one standing, the side that can throw more bodies and more shells into the meat grinder. Suddenly, a general's job isn't about strategy, it's about managing a ledger of death.
Remember that quote from the beginning? Bleed France white? Well, the Battle of Verdun is where that idea became horrifyingly real. The German goal at Verdun wasn't to capture the fortress. No, the goal was to create a mincing machine, a hell on earth that the French couldn't possibly abandon, forcing them to feed division after division into the fight until their army and their will to fight was just gone. It was literally killing for the sake of killing.
The British answer to the meat grinder at Verdun was the Battle of the Somme, and the numbers, they're just hard to wrap your head around. On the very first day alone, the British Army suffered 57,000 casualties. Think about that. That's not a battle, that's a catastrophe. And it just went on and on for 5 months. For the commanders, this was a constant pressure cooker, trying to sustain an offensive that was failing, while their supply lines for men and material were stretched to the absolute breaking point. By the end of it, the total butcher's bill for the Somme was over 1 million men, from all sides. It's a number that just loses all meaning. And yet, and this is the truly chilling part, from the cold, hard perspective of attrition, the commanders could look at these numbers and say, it's working. They're inflicting huge losses on the Germans. In their minds, this was the only path to victory. Just keep pushing, and eventually, the other guy has to break. But even the most hardened general could see this couldn't go on forever. The cost was just too high. So, at the same time all this grinding was happening, a different kind of war was being fought behind the lines. A desperate race for a technological get-out-of-jail-free card. They needed a silver bullet, some new invention that could finally break the deadlock.
One of the first and most terrifying ideas was poison gas. Can you imagine? A silent, creeping cloud of death drifting across no man's land? It created a whole new kind of psychological terror. But it wasn't the answer, because as soon as one side used it, the other side invented gas masks. So it never really created that decisive breakthrough. It just added another layer of misery and horror to life in the trenches.
Now this was a big one, the tank. This was literally a weapon designed from the ground up to solve the problem of the trenches. It's a steel box that can roll over barbed wire and shrug off machine gun bullets. On paper, it's the perfect solution. But the first ones they rolled out of the Somme, well, they were just not ready for prime time. They were slow, they broke down constantly, and there just weren't enough of them to have a real impact. A brilliant idea, but the technology just wasn't there yet.
And while all this was happening on the ground, a whole new battlefield was opening up in the sky. I mean, aircraft technology just exploded during the war. At first, they were just these flimsy things used for reconnaissance, being the eyes for the artillery, which was a huge deal. But, of course, that meant the other side started sending up planes to shoot your spotter planes down. And from there, you get fighters, and then bombers. Suddenly, the sky itself is a front line.
So you add all these new technologies up, gas, tanks, planes. What's the final verdict? Well, they absolutely changed warfare forever, no question. But they weren't the easy win the commanders were praying for. In fact, more often than not, they just made the war more complex and more horrific. Instead of solving the problem of the stalemate, they just amplified the industrial scale of the killing.
And that leads us to a really difficult final question. You look at these commanders and you see men who were completely trapped. Their training was useless, their tactics were obsolete, and they were facing new killing technologies every day. So it makes you wonder, when weapons advance so much faster than strategy, is that grim, bloody slide into a war of attrition just inevitable? Is that what happens when the old rules no longer apply?